Sanje Choda Soja Sona La Janju Tanya Soja Taje Sanje Janju Bado Tanya Taje Chijin Jebe Sona Jola Benje Sanje Chobara Sho Sanje Choda Soja Janju Bado Tanya Taje Chijin Jebe Sona Jola Benje Sanje Chobara Sho Wala so Tayanta Gade Gade Para Som Gade Bodhi Tayanta Gade Gade Para Gade Para Som Gade Bodhi So Tayanta Gade Para Gade Para Som Gade Bodhi So Wala so Simja Tamje Gado Topja Lana Machiba Sanje Komaran Boje Chineja Tobacha And teach the Changes of a love and a tuition and now to Langi, Lawa, single, symbol, two, Tojeshu, Manoach God, and the cops about the Takaja. Gets a Chambush as a Chunju, then the Geshe to bring in some chat.
So we begin by setting a motivation to do whatever we possibly can to attain the peerless state of enlightenment to benefit all sentient beings. To attain that state, we know we must perfect all the trainings on the Bodhisattva path. To perfect them in turn, we must then have a good understanding of them. And to gain that understanding, we must be able to trust a reliable source of those instructions. So it is with this in mind that we are here this morning to listen to the great mind training text known as the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, as composed by Master Shantideva.
Oh, yeah, all of them, what in the chat. That Namjuna Shinchen, Choshan said Tabiak, what that Namju Chetik, dinner Shin Chechen, Takaja. And the Chig, Rangatung Nankala, and Jimor and the teacher Lama Yimba, number Tapjala, Tujishimo Timba, Lama Tuba, which set up.
Normally, as we normally do as well, we set up the merit field in the space in front, which consists of, in fact, our own guru, but here in the aspect of Shakyamuni Buddha.
And the Shechi Chanicha, yes, and because yes, and Yan Jacket to go, don't say number Kula Chugo will make it torture so much, but Muslim Kura, and show you such Rangata. Rangi City, Pamane, Chebetin, Chebe, marking a Simja Tam, George Simjatan, Mazan, Nevada, you have some what the Kumbacha.
And that the figure of the Buddha seated in the Vajra posture, he has one face, the two hands, with the right hand in the earth touching mudra, and in the left hand, which is in the meditative equipoise posture, is an alms bowl filled with nectar. And we really have the certainty that the Buddha is really there in front of us. All around us are all kinds of other sentient beings, beginning with our parents, to those of us, those we have that relationship with, to those who are neutral, those who we dislike, and so on, and to include the idea of all beings in all the 6 realms of existence.
Ranga Duna said, Lama Tunganangal said, Lama Tuba Umbuti, the and the Chiu Omkabo, Timba Amo, Tua Hong, the Yigisum set up, and the Tuga Hole, we said part of Mevaton, Shinrajan, Yeshiba, on that the Jabba Janta, and the Yeshiba, the Lama Tuba, number Jant and a tip, and only Ongo Chulama Children, Mujiba, Weekend, what is Kumbashe.
And the bringing our focus again to the figure in front, representing the merit field, the figure of Shakyamuni Buddha, who is marked at the crown by the seed syllable Om, and the throat by the seed syllable A, and at the heart by its seed syllable Hung. And from that Hung at the heart center, light rays now emanate, going out into the pure realms. and inviting back the wisdom beings and empowering deities. The wisdom beings dissolve into the central figure, and the empowering deities confer the nectar of empowerment, the sum of which overflows the crown, spontaneously producing the figure of actual being.
어떤 공부시 어떤 아니 저 어떤 아니 저거 라마 투베 온보티 언구송 투게 연대 로다 다 하도도 안 나라주도 투게 나라주도 람라 나라주도 뭐바서 산지게 인테게 어떤 이바데 이바데 뭐저 받잖아 아니 라마 투베 온보 구송 투게 연대 되네 아니 저거 가서다 간자 저거 가서다 대화 가서다 가서도 저 가서도 문도가 봐 이제가 봐 당외 대발로 소바되게 배 중시 봐 개받지 아니 랑가 타고도 심제다 탐제자 안 가서다 뒤에 대화할 대외 미대바 동해에 동해 찍잖아 찍내는 유예되겠지 아니 저 코에게 동해게 나초되게 삼러다 대발 대달라 미베 아니 가서 닝지게 아니 라마토베 온볼레 미베 아니 대바께네 아니 저 가서도 어떻게 딱 간자 저 대다도 심제 대다 단자 아니 동네 기도 저들 전화지 모르 저와 주제 대바다 대외 주제 저와 전화지 모르 대바 주제 대바 쇼트 대바 다게 저 대다 전화 너무 투명 뭐 챙길라 공부시 안 대다 단자 대와다 대외 주제 저와 맞는 지 모르 미저와 주제 미저와 쇼트 미저와 다게 저 대다 전화 너무 투명 챙길라 다 대다 탐제 용어를 가서는 아니 딱 차단게 로디게 객지고 여반서 아니 대다타 일이 차단될 때 단열로는 지모를 내가 주지 내가 쇼치 내가 다게 제가 대다 전에 라마 투베 온거 친구라도 선대 제발라 때는 라마 투베 온거 그래 되는 거 왜서 제가 규바 토마면 디바드 켜바도 세메시 개발라 받으죠 디바드 또 맞춰봐자 라자 심지 탐자를 계속 선대 공부하자
So really regarding the figure of Shakyamuni Buddha, the qualities of an enlightened being's body, speech, and mind are brought to mind, but also we recollect the fact that the Buddha has, for our sake, generated that mind of enlightenment and practiced on the path with that same motivation, and indeed attained a state of enlightenment as well with that same motivation to work for all sentient beings, including us, of course. So with this recognition and recalling this, then we are filled with the faith, pure faith, manifest faith, and the faith of conviction. And likewise, all sentient beings all around, they want happiness so badly, and they don't want suffering, and that they are bereft of the former and they are inundated by the latter. And so they have to endure the very manifold sufferings of the desire realm and the 6 realms of existence. And so they also have a recognition of that faith that the Buddha inspires, the faith of pure faith, the manifest faith, and the faith of conviction. And we think on those sentient beings, really how wonderful it would be if they could be relieved of the suffering and the causes of suffering. May this be the case. I will see to it that it is the case. O Guru Deity, please bless me to make this so. And we're thinking also how wonderful it would be if all these sentient beings had happiness and the causes of happiness. May this be the case. I will see to it that it is the case. O Guru Deity, please bless me to make this so. How wonderful if all sentient beings had happiness that knows no suffering and the excellent bliss of liberation. May it be the case. I will see to it that it is the case. O Guru Deity, please bless me to make this so. And in further reflection, we realize that none of this is possible because of the various discriminatory attitudes of attachment and aversion that we have in our minds, always this judgmental attitude. And so also we must include a prayer for equanimity. How wonderful it would be if all sentient beings could abide in equanimity, free from attachment and anger that hold some close and others distant. May this be the case. I will see to it that it is the case. O Guru Deity, please bless me to make this so. And so as a result of our sincere supplications, the light rays begin to emanate from the heart center of the Guru Buddha in front. And these permeate ourselves and all sentient beings, and be eradicating all negativities and obscurations that we have accumulated since beginning this time in general. And in particular, it really nullifies all of the impediments and obscurations to our being able to generate these four immeasurable realizations. And indeed, we are also endowed with a special capacity to do just that, to realize the immeasurable, the four immeasurables.
Yeah, what is combat teacher? And then in Bayan, that can judge what I can judge Simjet Tamjet, the what Tamjet, the Batunga Tamjet, the Jawat Jibala, that can judge you. That the Casade Jebala, that Ransanje Kuma Matomna, that Jematu, Casana, Simjet comes the Mebana, so what Jimba Yensa, and Jija Simjet turned to Jovala, and it Caso de Simjet come the Meba, and it take the Yabuji. Shiguza, that in the Indu, that come to Meba, not so much to get them. And my Shimbat, Shandu, and but Peter was down, chatting was to me to that touch about it. Then they invite that, then they indeed that Simjatamja, that Sanjay Salakoga to that, Pakoga to the Kotumodo, that is a come to Meba, not so much to get Chaza Chico, cause of that. Tumba Shantish to go to, and then there's a Sanjay Komamatum, Tamento. What that and the truth of this Sanjay Nashi, then a Sanjay Komamado Tamadus. But that did Tobala Janjuga Semda. And don't need to be set up together Malam Tamever. Then the Imbayanza, then the Imbayanza, on that Janjuga shoot that Geshe Jubege and the Chicasote. Shung Geshe Chuba Namsolanda, Shung Kiabota was in Bayanza, and the tea shoot it, and Kobati shed the Nigi, something what the Kumacha.
So this powerful aspiration we have for all sentient beings to have happiness and the causes of happiness, as well as be free of suffering and the causes of suffering, etc., is really leading to the notion that I must attain the state of enlightenment to be able to do this. And it's the only way, because of the fact that from the enlightened perspective, the Buddha, the enlightened beings have that the knowledge of the individual aspirations of beings, their different dispositions, the karmic permutations, and so on. And so that they can prescribe precisely what's necessary for them to attain a fully qualified happiness, and this kind of bringing that to an excellent perfection. So it's kind of like from, on the one hand, the knowing that that is where I must operate from, but also knowing that it's out of my reach at the moment. I really can, this idea of leading all sentient beings to enlightenment is somewhat beyond me at present. But I also recognize that there is no other way other than the attainment of enlightenment to benefit all sentient beings. So therefore I look into the primary causes that will lead to that result, being the generation of a realization of the mind of enlightenment itself, and the realization, direct realization of emptiness, the wisdom of that emptiness. And so this is very, very important. And so for that reason, I am here to listen to some words from that great mind training text called the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, detailing precisely the kind of activities that a bodhisattva should engage in.
What is it? That in the names I guess I could show and it's a Chasawa chicken and because Namsul Lambata touch about Yola, Takaja kicked over the Takaja, the control the shed and get Chigu Yorata, no more solas, what is which you and then the cause about that, and because of the control. Konchok Kasol Takacha Moscow Nyambota, Sube Nyamne, Kalsigo Scholar, that's Sube Liu to Sungu Yobayinsa, and the Genda Konro, that Shatan La Soba Tigeti, and that Mabambat, Tametic, the Kichigo Yobayinsa, but and Takanja that is that 다른 아주 다들 가서 봐봐도 어느 소벨리우 카도 레데어와 어떤래.
And so part of the extensive explanation of the Bodhisattva's activities within this text is, of course, detailing the particular and obstacles to the attainment of enlightenment. And these, of course, center on the mental afflictions. And in particular, we are dealing here in this chapter on the mental afflictions of anger and hatred, and see how destructive they are towards our attaining of that much desired goal. And also of course, detailing the problem of anger and hatred, Master Shantideva, of course, details also the antidote to that, which is, of course, patience. And indeed, this entire chapter 6 is dedicated towards the cultivation of patience.
So 다들 전주고 중 다 가서 대 샤르마 되는 거를 가서 랑 감숨 또 견뎌지네 라 너무 셰게 너무 생활도 존나 대대와이나 어느 감숨래 아니 견뎌 감숨래 타와 지긴 있어 견뎌지는데 셰게에서 깨물란 게 소리 차그랬어 들려서 라 너무 감숨래 개와 감숨래 그다 감숨래 감성 코알에 타와라 다 녀모디 괜찮아서 녀모가 상황도 잡아는 감성을 견뎌 용 그래서 개투고 말와 아니 이 개물한 게 소리 차그랬을 텐데 이번에도 감성을 견뎌 지금 저게 다 들려 감성을 타네 그래서 코알에 타네 대체발라 아니 녀모를 갑자기 잡고서 수고도 와 어떤데 다 된데 이번에서 다 컨트롤다 돼서 같이 콘스토바 이번에서 되게 어떨지
So this particular chapter of the Bodhisattva's way of life is kind of like within the context of our what can only be described as a laughable attempts to gain deliverance from the three realms of existence, and without ever opposing the mental afflictions, without constantly being under the control of the mental afflictions. And so it's so important for us to understand that if we're avoiding the kind of dealing with mental affliction, not able to oppose mental affliction, but still have this massive desire to attain liberation from the three realms of cyclic existence, then that is really something laughable, quite pathetic, because what is absolutely essential is that we have to oppose the mental afflictions. This is what Master Shantideva is pointing out here. And in this context, we have to oppose and eradicate anger and aversion and hatred.
한다는 딩게라 소다다스 마고조원데 아니 세베 가서 컨트롤님이 세베 팽 마송도다 가서나 소소군에 냠내 타지말 등고 여기네 타지바 신고로 와 되면서 컨트롤사 셰다되게 교영 가르 요르스 내가 교영 가르치고도 풀의 교영 가르치고도 뭐라다 내가 위견다 지금 소소게 지금 가서 샘시들은 맨네베트다 빨라 니다 세다 가르치 되게 돼 아니 거기 다다지 가서도 지금 되게 돼 다다지다 용마도 하잖아 안 되게 돼 아니 개개 속도 니 기분 하고 해다 아니 지금 왔다 된게 샘 마기는 다 그냥 뭐 못해야지 용되기도 와 근데 내가 그랬더니 용되기를 아니 풀라네 아니 가서 딜라 때네 아니야 녀모 시험은 보직다 레사한 것도 와 다지 딜라 때네 레사도 뭐 보지 사한 것도 와다 대자 말에 아니 나를 사줘 개바되게 좀 그랬어 것도 와 그러와 그 당보도 요 가서 당보들 가서 개바동도 사회 진다 대신 출라서 내가 가야도 콜로지게 좀 받쳤어 근데 그러 개바동도 사회게 집바당와 대화셔발로 쳐봐제와 소스 다 소나라 추림 송알라 소바 되게 아니 다 내가 근데 저번에 개바동이 껴서 좀 그랬어 뭐다 응알 사바되게 좀예 아니 치서 사도 사이를 뇌게네 아니 뇌게에 아니 내가 들래 아니 디가라 아니 지금 샘시데 내마도시네 강에 뭐 붙자대 아니 뭐 벌 못는 동을 그 사도 사이 뭐 용 되게 다 되게 네바 되게 돼 시. 아니 서바 콤바이나 아니 딜레 녀부 때는 콜리 상황도 마당하잖아. 서바 콤바이나 아니 어다 내가 타두게네 되만 보체다 텔라도 툭투에 어디다 숨고도 와.
So because of the kind of like the comprehensive nature of the goal that we are pursuing, that it is necessary, as in Master Shantideva, even the Bodhisattva's way of life, to lay out a very detailed exposition of both the faults of anger and attachment on the one hand, and then the benefits of patience on the other, so that we are utterly convinced of one over the other. And so in dealing with anger and aversion and hatred, of course, we look at the faults that are both temporary and then ultimate, are in the short term and in the long term. And we can see there's nothing good to be said for either case, that the short-term problems of having an angry mind, an irritated disposition, is to have no peace of mind. We're unsettled constantly. Our sleep is disturbed, our appetite is disturbed, etc., etc., as well as our relationships with others, of course. And then of course the faults can go on and on. There's so many, and not to mention that the karma that we are accumulating through this mental affliction is going to have very, very negative repercussions in the future. And so even in the virtues that we have accumulated in the past, even over, as it said in an earlier verse, over 1,000 eons of virtue, generated through acts of generosity and ethical conduct, etc., can be destroyed in one moment of anger directed at a bodhisattva. And so this is showing you how destructive the attitude of anger and hatred is, and that it is something which is very, very destructive both in the present and into the future for us. And then it starts to detail the benefits of patience, and showing again how patience has the diametric kind of opposite effect on the mind. It's the mind that maintains a stability, a certain peace of mind that is able to put up with and deal with incidences in life that are would have generally upset us. And so it's able to kind of bring a kind of a temporary sense of peace of mind to us, and a good sense of well-being, but also the causes that are laid down, the karmas that are laid down, will have very positive manifestations when they write them into the future as well.
或者在那什么人上，他感觉这个结巴动的给在中国的是的，我说来当我这个他这个讲究什么这了，出外人呢，他结巴动的给在中国的我这，那讲究什么讲究什么人的跟这个讲究什么。可说的他可是的他让来多把毛啊这了，出外人呢，那结巴加一给在中国所以这我的那用过多，结巴加一给在是吧？现在。可是这些解释，那么他出版一新的出征，金巴当我的出征说我是给我加一种个的生活的，他本来解释全部讲究什么这个，讲究什么这了出版呢？现在这当给我动个嘛，就嘛这给我加一种个，看他讲究个生活我个样，多是讲贵是吧？但这解释专门的可是呢，罗的金巴当我当，这些了缺巴当，那说过了出征说啊，这个的解释全部是。다 동네 도배 셰럽게 쓰면 게 아니 계좌 유나 네 정부에서 말이에요. 정부에서 말이에요. 다 진짜 다 되게 동서 시행 계좌보다 소수의 계좌 쌓아봤더니 동네 도배 셰럽을 개답이야. 동네 도배 셰럽을 쓰면 지야 돼. 다 되게 제가 이나 아니 저기 컨트롤러서 왔는데 개봐 이네 아니 계좌들 좀 놔두 봐 소리지. 되게 내가 요새 다다 중에 되다다 개봐 동도 서버 진짜 대세 출라 속서 개봐 그러와 개바 동도 사바이 진짜 대체 진바 땅와 대화시와라 초바 제바 소나라 아니 추림 송아 되게 아니 계좌 되게 봐 좀좀 그랬어. 이제 컨트롤 지금 좀 그랬어. 로 정부에서 다 되지도 다 디나로를 돈이 더 셔럽 또 비켜서 되게 정부에서 말해. 정부에서 말해. 와다 된데 이마서 된저서 또 내가 알도 하대. 저 가서도 매미배 개담네 아는 거와지에다. 심지 탐지도 산자를 고바 도배 좀 거와지 다가내 신게 아니 돈이 더 셔럽 강투도 그 쓰바지네. 다 주마에 몇개나 야보다 주마 충제가 쓰바지와이나 아니 된데 계속 뭐 좀라 평균이었어. 가서 당과라서 내 당고에 갑자기 견다 쳐도 컨트롤 상고 도 안디인도 거기 개와 가르쳐면 돈이 또 셔러 그 쓰면 두발 제디 개체 뭐 임바차 어떤지
So that particular verse relating to the eons of 1,000 eons of virtue being destroyed due to our generating anger at a bodhisattva, that refers to a beginner. Now, if it's a bodhisattva getting angry at another bodhisattva, the amount of destruction is reduced to 100 eons of virtue that may be destroyed. Furthermore, when in the verse it refers to root virtues that are generated through the making offerings to those gone to bliss, the virtues generated through acts of generosity and through the abiding in ethical conduct. Now, it does not refer to virtues that are generated whereby our motivation and our action has been imbued with the wisdom of emptiness. So this is an important distinction. And so the root virtues accumulated by a mind which is genuinely imbued with the wisdom of emptiness are not destroyed in this way. And so it's important, therefore, that we, dedicate our virtues towards enlightenment, and with as much as possible imbued that action with the wisdom of emptiness.
근데 요자 디제마데 셰단답이 가사 셰단답이 디과메스 소바답이 가도면 델레 소바 내den자 근데 임바 인사 당고서 캐두건 경마도 건자 아니 소바 내den이 저는 공부레스 나조 수jo 공부자다 좀제 삼로다네 소베 페유 아니 콘류님의 좀제 삼로다네 아니 배 개침부 쓰지는 안디제는 나조 수게 나조서 좀제 나소베 고게 좀제 타예베던 뭐유 내주다 두베던 좀제 삼로다네 아니 콘로서나 캐두게 경도 소바komne 캐두게 경도 되게 삼로다네 아니 소베 고말들 고메라 아니 제가서데 딱저 랑 캐두라 경미 되바 인자 소바kom에기 아니 가서데 소바kom에 까둘레 내두고레스 데네자 데 소발레 내den제 공투고레스 다 공고레스 고버저 아니 나조 수게 고버저 나조 아니 좀제 나조베 고나 삼로다는 아니 로타 좀제라 때네 아니 녀바 째네 아니 소바kom 두고 저거 수고해서래 어떻게
And so, as it says in verse 2, there is no negativity like hatred and no fortitude like patience. Thus, I should strive in various ways to meditate on patience. And so what it's pointing out here is that, on the one hand, we have to make the clear distinction. There's nothing as bad as hatred in terms of negativities, and there's no fortitude like patience for really arming the mind. And therefore it really behoves us to look into this from every angle and to make sure that we have every possible reasoning for, on the one hand, avoiding and dispelling anger and hatred and seeing the fault therein, and on the other hand, that which supports and promotes the choice of patience in all incidents. Shoktan gyatang shipju shepgu ni wogi chikdi somba gomna Den Migawala Sambavan.
Temega was a what happened to logo Mokum Kavachor, Jumzen Shene, and go Jumzen Shene, and go to Sebeg paying to get that, Konchok Nimi to get ten, that way you can Rigbel Lamne, Nebanyan. Shwata, Rigbel Lamne, Nebanyan, Nebanyan, that what it said to Sumba Komna, Temega was Sambala Nietzsche. Ruata, Jumza Samlatan, that's also keeping. 문에잖아 뭐유 개변 그러셔 문에잖아 그 가서 대화 두배다 동네세게 뭐유도 투바 그다 뭐유 내수도 투배도는 근데 지고 그래서 내주 신배도나 아니 데라 다 지고서 데라 공부이나 대미가 상반나 니체 개발셔봐 된도 와자 당불라시 개발셔봐다시 겁나 된 라워 주바 되니 배유 주바 And Kala Sube, you, Kala Sube, Top Geba was subject.
So we have arrived in the text, chapter 6, at verse. We just finished verse number 13, and we're looking now at the third of the three main outlines that we have looked at so far. And this states that if we habituate, then there is nothing that does not become easier, and this has two subsections to it: an extensive explanation and then a summary. The extensive explanation, has further four outlines. The first is through habituation. Everything will become easier, and that the second is that there's an example that is going to establish that. Thirdly, the objects towards which we should have patience, and fourthly, again through habituation, an example of how we can generate powerful patience. And so what's at play here is how we, and then through all of this chapter in particular, how we can develop the mental strength, the mental habituation that can help us to oppose any instance of anger or hatred and replace it with the fortitude of patience. And that we, the best path of doing this is the path of reasoning in order to grow that conviction. And so it's important that we are acting in harmony with actuality. And so this is the kind of reasoning that we can kind of furnish to our mind in order to gain this certain conviction.
Conta, bicho, 다 당부될 왔다 가서 겁나 된 라워 주바서 겁나 된 라워 주바서는 자월래 게들 라워 미주베 뭐데 가요 요마에 대외 내가 충고베 내가 전부 서버지서.
So the first of those particular set of headings was that once we are habituated, things will be easier. And verse number 14 states, there is nothing whatsoever that is not made easier through acquaintance. So through becoming acquainted with small harms, I should learn to patiently accept greater harms.
지난 거저 류기 내단에 류기 내단들 꼭 체지어 때 배나 저기 그래서 단다 류제 야부 세신게 류기 제 야부 용기들 도가 제미스틱 스그로 야부 용기도 당부 거주도 강해요 봐. 거 이제 직제 니제 알고 되네 레라달라다 거 가세메가 주고도 봐. 용구로 왔다. 다 류라 되네 또 셈게 내단서 도도 딜레 다 가자 저 거소래 누버차 샘스도 고바 탐에도 배우고 다 뭐에 내주 투바 치바이나 고바 탐에도 배우고 거 델리 용되기도 와 용되기도 와다 델리 용되기 요래 거 델리 용되기도 와뭐 델리
So just in this regard, there's a distinction that can be made between the body and the mind here, that the body can tolerate pain and so on, but there's a limit to how much pain and so on that the body can accept. However, the mind is much more powerful entity in that it is unlimited in once the mind is trained in a certain way, and it is unlimited in how much discomfort it can tolerate.
류레 지나 체열 때 이네 류레 갈간삼 제도가 배는 거죠. 갈간삼 제도가 배는 지금 단다 좀 류제 저게 제미스틱 저게 깨라치 못해서 배 단다 배 그저 지금 루부터 이기는 시설을 도와. 이는 당분에 제대로 요 말봐. 뭐 강에들 동네제 아니 류 코랑 그제 제투바데 거 제투에 차에 도와. 그러다 알아서 그거 제투고 보면 어제 지금 해야 와. 다 강에라 동네제 지제 니제 아니 대두주 다 로충중 간에 제투바 이나 간자스는 류티백서도 가봐 배주 땅땅 요견서 가라도 통나라. 요견서로 차거다. 이네 딜레 세요 봐. 다 셈게 내다서 디말 딜레 다 가자다. 가서라 다 가자 저게 다 딜레 다 가자다. 다 가서 내다 배트코너 같이 그래서 셈게 공부 탐에도 배거든. 요것도 다 뭐 내주 침바 이나.
So with training, of course, the body itself can be quite remarkable in the degree to which it can be trained. You can just give an example of gymnastics, and so if one starts very young, it is quite remarkable what one can train the body to do. That of course extremely difficult to begin with, but again it's this force of constant repetition of the same movements and so on. That one can actually train the body to do quite remarkable things. And so even so, there is a limit, isn't there, to what can be achieved physically. But again, in contrast to that, the body's capacity is limitless. And so the body can be trained there's no kind of limit to how the mind can be trained.
Please sound okay. Yeah, okay.
It's a little bit quiet.
What? Come, I can't taste it. Yeah, please come. Yeah, taste it here. Sorry. Maybe here. Oh, yeah, better. Sorry. It's okay?
Yeah, good.
Yeah, okay, better. 어때들 알아? 단단 가서 저기 가서도 콘로 사에다 되게다가 그 건배 온게 아니 콘로 사나 가서 랑슈고 이제 용 되고요. 제 콘로 사나 강에도 제거다 강에 막 못 죽으면 도와. 콘로 사나 소소라 즉 팬토고 입어서 나와서 또 건배 온거 용 되고요. 좋아. 뭐이 내주다 좀 말해. 다 들을 때는 동에 무튼 용 되게 때 이내 건배 온게 콘로 사도 그 대단한 되게 지금 pengu 입에 나와 차대도 꼭 건배 온거 용 되게 열어 봐. 좋아. 소바 건데 건배 매서 tinnu고도 삼사 용 되게 도와. 내가 건배 온거 용으로 와.
So we can also understand this power of repetition and habituation when it comes to anger. The way anger manifests in our life, it's sort of like automatic. It's something that kind of comes forth and kind of pronounces itself as, I'm the savior of this situation. I'm the beneficial thing in your life right now. I'm the one who's going to resolve this situation. Even though, we always look back and the results are always kind of negative in that sense. But so you can see the tremendous habitual power that the notion of anger has in our lives, that it's kind of like it spontaneously erupts at the instance of every kind of setback that we have in life. So attachment to desire is the same, isn't it? That it arises, it kind of like it manifests as something that's going to be tremendously beneficial for us. I really want that, I really need that. And the thing is that the desire is an extremely expensive habit to have. It costs us so much. So you have this thing of the amount of effort we put in life, and that there's so many who kind of like put this massive effort in over a week, and then blow all that money that they earn in a week, and it's all blown by desire, by their need to have. And so and that this is the kind of lie that is presented. So desire is kind of telling you that this is what you want, this is what you need to be fulfilled. That's the scam of desire. The lie of hatred and anger is that it's out to protect you. It's offering protection of the self.
ngala koye de digi sha digi di take to tungne take to ta tumje yana yangdo samla de pe 지금 가서래 옹부 셔바 samla 참마 셔바 전에 아니 저 tum제 samla 되네 그래서 이시 랑그 돈에 아니 녀바 고유 내주도 가르샤디 아니 지금 조단 그랬도 조단 그랬시다 대화스 근데 컨텐츠 연구도 동에서 근데 무튼의 동에 컨텐츠도 무튼의 대화 그래 아니고 고유 그 내주도 투배 코네 아니 그 조단 데뷔 조단 그 돈에 그 삼로 14부 당와 인바이나 오호 다디 지단 디다 노데샤 디인상 무슨 무튼의 코알 코데샤 나 대자 무튼의 코알 코마고 딜라 타다다 가르치고서 오다 쇠발라 소바다 다가네 저 녀모를 카데자네 아니 코알 타와 지구도 고유 내주 15톤 디제바이나 다 당보다 막고면 온게 강에 연결다 남신의 검소나 아니 레라달라다 녀모 줘라 고바는 신전에 레라달라다 레라도 좋아 마세 아니 디 고유 내주도 투마서 고마 탐에도 배나 산제 줄로 줘되기도 와 그 잡된 게 참아 요바 인사 직들 잡된 참아 매바이나 그 공부 유도 레라고 용도 잡된 참아 요바데 다 공부 탐에도 패요 봐.
So these attitudes of the way in which we fold in the face of desire and anger is purely because of powerful habituation. These are kind of like automatic knee-jerk reactions. And so it's kind of like it's so important that we start the process of pausing to reason with ourselves. Do I really need this thing? Is it going to bring me happiness, or is it going to bring me suffering? Do I need to react angrily like this? Is that going to bring me satisfaction or more suffering? And so we need to also move beyond our sensual interpretation of life and into the internal kind of workings of the mental analysis, saying, okay, what's the mental reasoning here? What's really going on? And to kind of gain more confidence in doing that. So what is actually happening here? What is really going on here? And if we get to more subtle ways of responding to all of what's happening to us, we can see what is going to be helpful to gaining liberation from cyclic existence, to getting beyond that, and that and what are the unskillful choices that we need to leave behind. But it's necessary for us to get into the mental wisdom, the mental analysis internally to ask these questions. And it's difficult. It's going to be difficult at the beginning. You have resistance at the beginning, but again, as it says, there's nothing that does not become easier through acquaintance, through familiarity. And what's the good news is that when you're applying the reasoning for developing a love and compassion, the reasoning for generating the mind of enlightenment and emptiness and so on, you are on the side of what can be cultivated limitlessly. Why? Because it is backed up by valid reasoning.
어때래? 근데 이 맞아. 먼저 학고바 제들 거저 릭솜소 정도도와 학고바 당부제도 아니 저기 말아줘 온비 셰베기 학고도에 릭시 용구도 셰투에지 릭시 온비 셰바 상게 셰마도 받잖아. 들라 좀sel라 된 거에 정도도 봐. 들라 가서 들어서 대인자 가서 제발라 된 거지. 그러와 그러다 뭐죠? 아니 가서 중세 고조 아니 신도 고조 쓰는 거야. 먼저도 뭐서 세매기 뭐도 제투에지. 고락바락 받게. 다 되네고 릭지 가서 단다데 중세 고조서도 중세를 떼고 시르시 거야. 그 가서는 유디 셰발라 아니 그 저기 중세를 마대와 셰마도 가제도 그 중세를 떼고 거지. 중세를 들고 나 중세 고조르사 중세 양자를 된 거지. 릭베 남자 망부지를 떼는 셰바체 거지. 다 릭지 딜레 마 매바 되게 아니 나라도 내가 또 마도 봤잖아. 아니 롱라 된 거야 중국이야. 신도 고주르스겠지. 어디가 되게 더 조다 신배 돈에 아니 그 저기 또당 림바 되게 아니 가서래 하고 투에게 림바 되게 무슨 셈에 셰고에 제바 셈에 셰고에 될 중세 고조 되는 신도 고조 되는 롱라 된 거에 아니 되게 조다한테 신배 돈에 아니 유 제투가지. 뭐 여기 내주 신도 뭐 써야지.
And so, the process can involve this application of a threefold reasoning. That we have the reasoning that can come from our senses. So what is the way we interpret what's happening through the senses. So this is really what's most manifest to us and very clear that we can interpret. Now we can then bring that further by looking into the reasoning behind what's going on. This involves analysis, the process by which we analyze what's going on. And so all of this is in the text refers to manifest phenomena. So this is something that, yes, we can interpret through the senses, and then partially hidden phenomena, they are then can be revealed through this process of valid reasoning. And then there are a very hidden phenomena. And it said that this then we rely on insight there through the texts themselves, through
so it's kind
of a valid being, the words of a valid being explaining to us that we can rely on that as an indicator of what that hidden phenomena means.
What is 용구도 and there 타도나 녀알아 두고 요래. 다 되게 건가 타도도 아니 녀아질라 또네 아니 당워 되고 요래.
Oh,
so
and then but ultimately, of course, it has to come back to for the final kind of decision on what we do and don't do is based on our own experience.
Yeah, because of the Chamashawa Janet, that did some low, but Lula Tengoeti, but because Jabala Tengoeti, Jabala Den. And then Jabala Den Madu is negative, most on the Jabala Den, the death of Paul Madu, and Semekibu Lula Den. That the Tatuna, and then Rangi Noala Pachalco, Noala two cookies. Takaja, Kaja Digajana, because of the Kabdo the social law like Garichawa Dimamba Chena, Jumze Chomang, the Samlotane, and in Yabanet of Chase. What did it? That did it. And did you by any way you can nature sent to a pinkerwa?
And so whatever is occurring, whatever is happening, then we approach that initially then through what can be discerned through the senses, through interpreting there the manifest phenomena through the senses. Then, but we don't leave it at that. Then we can apply the process of internal reasoning and analysis and trying to get insight into the partially hidden phenomena of what's going on. And then ultimately, sorry, not ultimately, but then thirdly, if we again cannot come to a conclusion, a clear course of action from that level, then we can go down to like gaining insight into the hidden phenomena through the words of the valid being. But ultimately, as Kenna says, from all of that analysis, then we make a final decision based on our own experience. And so this is important that when it talks in that verse about varied reasoning, this is what it's referring to. That when it comes to making a decision, and that we give it the full kind of like value of what we have available to us in order to make sure that we are acting in harmony with actuality.
Then in by the Sobasing de Comadunga Camara Sungu Yorata, that a hot as a Magoma in Zakan take your remando, and Namshina, Kotabe, Sosu, Bezwejik, Nije, Sum Jet, and Rebecca Gablet Sama Yozako come to watch you good rest. Teresa, come not allow me with the kind you might start the Sungudua, and Combaina, allow me you were simply treating over Kaya, you were my interest, Bena. Bena Gombe on years as Senajanum and Dungela Dewa to Shabatans. Rota, Jigger Red Gachada Rokasana, Ropena Senachambo Yugin Duzo, and rather Senachenge, Senachena Samanu, Tumanu Titid, and Sosola or Tati, near the Tolatang was a Yawachunso Sansaja, Sosola similar, dictate you some such Dewa Yoma Jorvata, Dewa Yoma Jorva. Munajana, the Bejutana. 대화 배지다고 하고 잡고 배지고 나왔죠. 다들 내틱 돼서 야구 중소 삼사지 영대가 여러 다고 생각 공배 온게디 소설 패토도 삼사지 소설의 삼로 당다지 전 저라 문에잖아. 배나 랑게 세네 롱제바 이네다 디제네 아니 미지 된다 템바지 제 양은想了 지마땅네 아니 디 진백에 아니 가서다 지금 차라보다 되게 근데 장주가 생각 전화 산제 주주에게 근데 제목 뭐 열때 디 제목가 저 소소 딱 보잖아 사만의 투만의 저 강에도 열때 디 강에 나와서 디 대화 놓자고 열어 어디를 용되다 소소 고마이나 인데서 변나 고배 온게 세나잖아 동에라 대화 뒤셔봐 진도서 라 뒤셔와 진도 아니 장주 선배 동에 탐제 대외 뒤셔 겁냐 로다 대외 뒤셔 겁냐 거는 타르 최탐제라 대화 좋아 세저에 등에서 토바가 참 돌려 송바我想
And so yes, in terms of the cultivation of patience, the main subject matter of this chapter, then it says too that it can be cultivated just as efficiently through that process of habituation, and again through applying the reasoning, not just once or twice, but again and again and again and again and again, never giving up. To constantly make that effort and backing what you're doing up with the valid reasoning. Make sure that it's backed up with valid reasoning. Then there's no reason and there's no obstacle to being able to cultivate patience perfectly by doing so. Again, it's the process of habituation. And this verse is saying just that. It's saying here that through habituation, there's nothing that can not become easier. And that, for example, saying here, looking at the negative example, through habituation, a miserly person actually sees suffering as happiness. So again, through habituation, they've got this weird idea that, starving themselves and not spending any money, they think that's a good thing, and that they have saved another penny, and they get this kind of kick out of doing that. And so they've recognized suffering as actual happiness. Whereas, if they had, if they understood the actuality of things, that through generosity, one can accumulate vast amounts of merit, and again, have adequate and plenty in future lives. And if one is able to do so with the mind of enlightenment, one is laying down the causes for enlightenment itself. This is beyond it, that they actually just stuck in this really tight circular thought pattern, and that if they can save another dime, and that this is a great thrill. So it's kind of like really false reasoning there. Whereas on the other hand, a bodhisattva will also be seeing all suffering as happiness, and habituating to being able to do that, but is doing so on the basis of valid reasoning, and therefore that then will lead to being able to lead to to liberation. And then and this is kind of something that's stated in the sutra known as the Attainment of Meditative Concentration.
당가라서 미인도 남주요래 남주의 배주당도 어디다 케벤도 문도 케벤 가자도 케벤 여바이나 아니 거 지그 가서데 케벤 여바이나 아니 데고서 거지 지 가서도 줍투와지 용해도가 용도가다 어데 인자 서베 편연다 컨주님이 되게 대배 지 가서데 녀바녀바지 다 중앙 인바이나 거 다지 가서데 서바고메 들라 가서 연구하러 가서 연구하러 어다든지 단니바 되니 배유주바네 자월려서 주다 샤장 당단에 제공라서 초와다 연발라서 제바이 되면 동에 지마동서.
And so it's really pointing out here that as human beings, our distinctive attribute is of intelligence. Therefore, really, we need to look at what is really profitable for us in our choices. What can we really gain? And so this is the kind of the main, how do you say, the point at which we should make our decisions. And so, and go for that, therefore. Then we really actually follow up then on the conclusion that we come to. And this context here, it's about looking at the benefits of patience and the faults of anger. And again, through all of these verses, I've been furnished with more and more reasoning to be able to make the choice to go for patience and to avoid the faults of anger at all costs. The second of these outlines promised us an example to exemplify what had been discussed in the previous verse. This is verse number 15, and it reads as follows. Who has not seen this to be so with trifling sufferings, such as the bites of snakes and insects, feelings of hunger and thirst, and with such minor things as rashes?
네 예발라 소바다 사두자에 사달라이 박내 초든지 소바 제이 되메베 동에 고마나 쇠라와다 소소티 가서래 다 지금 된데그 동에 되게 아니 지금 가서래 다저 소소 겁나 양 거지 동에 된저 당도 렌토에 중국도 마 겁나 동에 아니 쇠마도 같이 마도도 어디 연구도 왔어 다들 인바자 다른 것도 쇠바검 쓰는데 다과 달래그 동에 쇠대 봐서 개자 말아 쇠바검 쓰데 동에 디 아니 동에 디 아니 딜할 때는 아니 좀샘 가서 지금 가서다가 동해 딜할 때는 아니 지금 쇠마도 배는 딱 가서 동해 디 라테는 아니 sem딱 콘도서는 셈 먹기 받쳐야 들어와 셈 먹기 받쳐야 돼 어디 아니 금자 삼도 당와이나 아니 갈제는 쇠두고 말했어 그리고 쇠두고 말했어 아니 서로 앞에랑 가서 류를 녀바자고 된데 아니 쇠두한테 연구도 와서 딱 거기서 삼로 땅땅게 돈내고 아니 지금 마쇠바디 아니 파 예전에 쇠바디 삼류 돈에 줍두고 왔어 줍두고 줍어도 지게 말 왔어 어디 숨기요사리 좋아 류를 강에 채워대 가져서 쇠네 대삼kan 대나무 강에 맞아 왔지 아니 소토에 두고 왔어 다 셈생인데 셈 고란다 다 누구 요 말와 얘네야다 소소가 다도 손에 나를 누구도 나를 지기도 쓰도 아니 거 맞아 봤어 와
And so what is being discussed here is of course the bodily harms of snake bite or insect bites, or harms in such as being thirsty or hungry or sick, and have various rashes and skin problems and so on. And these are referred to here as more kind of like pointless sufferings that we have seen with our own eyes, how through habituation one can bear, one can overcome them, that one can develop patience so that they are made easier. And we've also seen that without that habituation, that these kinds of sufferings can be made bigger and more harsh than they ought to be. So this is something that we have seen, so therefore it's right that we should choose patience with regard to them. And it's kind of like saying, this suffering, all these versions of suffering, the idea is that through reasoning, through whatever approach we can, that we not allow that suffering to make the mind unhappy or unsettled, and that these are again referring to bodily harms, and that we kind of like we have to have this idea that we actually can really work with the physical pain through our own mind control, our own thinking, and we have this kind of I can how do you say accommodate what's occurring physically because of my mental attitude towards it. And of course, generally speaking, we experience physical pains. We experience physical pains, but the mind is generally not out to cause us harm. But that does occur because of the fact that we identify with this self. I'm being harmed here. It's poor me. Why me, and so on. And this sort of dialogue, internal dialogue of the mind, is something can exacerbate that particular suffering that we're undergoing. And so we have to look out for that as well.
我倒感觉这个可是当然的我说这水吧的宽容性的把这三路当当个团呢给这些个有吧三路当当团呢按你这个用过了吧本来我说本来恰恰吧이나你这个可是的本来出给拉是车가지这吧이나出给拉是车가지这三路当当온 게出给拉车出给拉车가这嘛说삼사제 거 삼对吧马刚话这차에 도와 아니 이제 추기라스 제가 되지다 선서 양고 저기 선배배 상보도 추기라스 제가 되지다 삼사야 그 삼로당다 지금은 그 추기라스 제가 되고 삼로당당 거 돈에 아니 지금 이 망하와 제다 지금 추기라스 제가 됐으면 배 선배 상보도서 그 삼로당당 거 저는 추기라스 지가 있는 그 삼로당당 거 저는 쌤 지 가서데 지금 조합해서 나 쌤도 조합 마베 니 용되기도 와 그 삼로 추기라스 제가 그런 거 속에 있는 니가를 직바 연구로 와. 니가를 직바 연구 봐. 지금 삼로 당당에 돈에 아니 추기라스 제가 잡아대 가서 연구는 지금 추기라스 제가 잡아대 아니 또 sem마기 봐지. 이 마대 봐지 용어 되기도 와. 그래서 그 삼로 당쪽으로 돈에 잡으러 와.
So it's very clear that the way in which we deal with either patients or suffering is down to our thinking, how we actually approach that, and what are the thoughts that we apply to these in turn. And it's certainly for a human being, it's very much glass half full, glass half empty scenario, where you might give a person a glass half full of water, and they are insulted by the fact that you only give them half a glass, and say, see a problem with that. And then you give another person a glass half full of water, and they're very satisfied with that, very delighted with a glass half full of water. And so it's kind of like saying the same scenario, but the different attitude, which is derived based on their thoughts about the matter itself.
추기라스 제가 그런 거 속에 얘는 니가를 직바 연구라. 추기라스 제가 직바 와. 얘네 찌라 가서 연구라. 찌라 가서 연구야 말이야. 가서 뭐에도 소스 삼로 당당 좀 잡아도 추기라스 제가 된 잡아도 와.
And so there, you have the same half glass of water that's given to both. One is quite satisfied with that. The other is completely unsatisfied, completely unhappy with it. So it's not the glass, not the water, it's the person's attitude.
그래 어디서 아니 동네 전에 다가랬다 동네 되게 아니 소소라 아니 저게 가서래 동네 되게 동네 뭐트였다 동네 들라 때네 아니 샬라니제 기야 고급 요바다 동네 들라 때네 다 가자 저게 소소 랭이 바사야 도토였다 아니 라 어디 동네디 아니 그 다가서 그 라완의 주배 많이 봤다 아니 그게 뭐고 질러 촌에 연구요 봤다 아니 되게 그 삼로 당당 아니 저기 개발 온게 동네 되게 샘 찍라 기부 차에 샘 찍라 마기와 매바 차에 마기와 모여에 샘 찍라 무유게 내주 시바 차에 샘 찍라 잡아게 샘 찍라 니지게 담아도 용 되기도 그 동네 코난 거 돈에는 그거 찍어 연구다 동네 들을 때는 가사 소소 삼로 당당할 때는 아니 그 저기 가서 대외 주도시다 동네 주도면 이용 되기도
So suffering is exactly the same. It's that how the individual approaches that suffering. That for some they can recognize suffering and automatically they are kind of like reminded, or they are kind of inspired to cultivate compassion, and that here they understand that the suffering arises from negative karma, so they will avoid that in the future, and that they recognize that this suffering is not something that arises, independently, that there are causes and conditions behind it, and so they don't identify so closely with it, and that they are not made unhappy by it, and they have this, they kind of it's the beginning of being able to cultivate compassion and love, etc. And so another person then can be overwhelmed by that suffering, and just it becomes larger and larger in their minds.
다른 이번에 계세 단위 전부 냠래 하나 두개 아니 저번에 너바 계견잖아 너바 계견데 라테네 아니 서바 검토고요도 아니 서바 대회 계획신이 따투에 잡았다. 배는 가서 내 당보이나 아니 저거 될때네 아니 세마게 봐 컨트롤사네 아니 라시니가 너바 제대로 용도도 그 너바 제와핀에 찍과래때 강사 소소 삼로 당당라테네 지기 계획신이 따투고요래 지기 담에 자스다고요 봐. 가서 그 삼로 당당 것도 지기 될 때는 아니 가서 케벤 렌트고 요래 찔라 때는 뒤 때는 케벤 말래 받잖아 모두는 동의 유튜브에 용도도
Again, another example is the Bodhisattvas in faced with somebody who is harming them, will immediately choose patience because they recognize that this is somebody like a teacher teaching them, giving them that opportunity to choose patience. So it's like a teacher showing them patience, giving them a lesson on how to cultivate patience. And whereas another person in the same situation will see that person as an enemy and therefore choose anger and trying to eradicate that enemy. And so it's a clear case about which of those two situations is going to be beneficial, which of those two situations will have a net gain outcome, and which will simply be suffering at the time and also lay down suffering causes that are going to manifest as suffering results in the future. And we have to make that clear distinction.
And comba de caso de you nature tubatona, comba shene, comba onge, de cutum the Jogua. That didn't coaching condo soba come to moto second, and casorta, Chicaso de Dendege Soba Dela, and the comedy jatumato, comma comla chatek duata. The same day, and comedy joina, and remember, got Tangwena Yabu come to us, that Yongomar was that. Pugu Chunju and Comba Laguin Nessinja, Pugu Chunju la Comba Lavala, Tambo Lavatan, Comba Cheese, Jamari, Dore, and then as you go between Judge, Niman and Nima to the Kansas and the Comba Os, and then Namchina, Sosuchugo, Comba Janakavina, trashing a Chagua. What I didn't say that Tambune, you can nature to Samlotan, and the legend between remember Chick, Nature, Sunja Kanjana, Kangama Wajodano. What in your Tapuchun Combalatan, and the Chango.
And so really it's kind of really dedicating ourselves to the training necessary to develop the habit whereby in our own thinking we'll always immediately go to patience and what is going to be necessary, what are the thoughts necessary here to establish patience in this particular situation. And that's understanding that, of course, at the very beginning it's going to be hard. And to think of it like a small child learning to walk, how difficult it is for them to get onto their feet, and to how unsteady they are at the very beginning, how slowly, and only with practice, isn't it? And that they become more confident, and before long, they can go with you anywhere you go. And so this is the same way we think of it. We think of ourselves like a child learning to walk, and that we constantly give it the necessary time and repetition to make it into a habit for ourselves so that it occurs naturally.
Yeah, the name is a Pugu Chunjun Dawde, and that Dawa Kashe Center, lost Simasim, Nako, Comatos, or Javik Bezun Chandana, Pamega Robache, the next day, Comajo Jabsing, that the name Majija, Roba Majija in the Shan, Koduna near Shavayina, and lost Singa China Kobaya Jabtumudua. What I do, that compare only you wanted to go, that's shame over what is it? Uncle Chipetun de Chavina, and call Dobu Combaja Chambutua. What I didn't have a similar dinner shireta, dinner shitchen, attack and chicken, what I bedroom Jagutua, what did it?
And so the small child, of course, is very much assisted by parents and all that to get on their feet and start the process of walking, from crawling to standing to walking and so on, and in that way they can learn to walk. But if they're left on their own devices, it may be reach 4 years of age and still not be able to walk. And so it's kind of like the mind is like that. We need to put it into practice. We need that support of our own reasoning, and to be able to establish this as a habit of ours so that we become really proficient at it.
That's Suma Kala Sobaku Yuni and Zawale, Sadanda, Chada, Longsoda, Neda, Chinda, Desola, Daja Sere, Michade, Dedajana never pills.
So the third of these four subheadings was towards what should we be patient? And the root text is verse number 16. I should not be impatient with heat and cold, wind and rain, sickness, bondage, and beatings. For if I am, the harm they will cause me will increase. Younger song So and this kind of comes in within the three categories of patience that are referred to in the teachings that we have covered, like the voluntary acceptance of suffering is one form of patience, the patience of not returning harm for harm, and the patience of gaining conviction in the Dharma.
ane tene tata chada lungla soba taka ja chunga lungla soba ta ane lula ne ta ne tamata poya ne ba ta ne ta ane chingwa ta ruwa ta ruwa ta kacha de rangi midwe shintu ta shingi tabala soba de chingwa ta ane yugwe tebala soba ta ki seri mija des seri mija de suzen o ta tenzo kati ta 탑시 여바이나 데레 동에 모여야 탑시 체 이네 셈네 아니 저기 거서도 안 가서라다 딜라 때는 먹기 봐 모여야지 그때 다 탑시 전에 돈도 동에도 연구도나 탑시 전에 동에도 용 그러다 다 그때 쪄서는 딜라 미가 제집에서 그때 쪄서면 딜라 미가 제집에서 왔다 찍도서 그때 탑시 여반 딜라 먹어 저는 마대 왔잖아 셈 먹기 봐자 마대 저거 탑시 체 아니 다 그때 탑시 매개지는 것들 아니 그 당도라는 왔다데 레 미제바다 미제 제바 취미사 완자다 교견 참자전은 그것도 도도 매발했어 그 당도 렌샤바 이나 어데는 세리 미자다 다들 미세 받잖아 마기 받잖아 마데서 수선 중앙 미자데서 대다잖아 아니 너발 하바 펴와 대다잖아 아니 돈데 지가서데 다 간자 저기 소소고 마기 받도 숙체다 용해다 안 디자마세 아니 딜라데나다 저 콘도산에 강가라 아니 지금 다 심발에 너와 개발된데 용되거라. 너와 배워주로 셔봐 오참.
And so this very much kind of falls under the first of those trainings in patience, to training of the patients to voluntarily accept suffering. And so here, whether it's heat or cold, and they often come together, isn't it? That when it's too hot, we try to cool down. When it's too cold, we try to heat up. And then also the elements of rain, of wind, and when the body is sick or is suffering by being bound or beaten, and that in all of these instances, you're saying to avoid getting angry, avoid getting irritated, and that it's very important to do this. And it's saying, because if we can't do that, then we all not only have the particular suffering that is manifesting, but also it's going to be enlarged. You know, it's going to increase because of the anger that we're bringing into the situation, increase because we're hitting out perhaps at somebody else, and that this is something that has to be avoided. And so it's kind of saying here, you know, if we can do something, of course, to avoid each of these particular harms, then it's very important for us to do that, you know, to act, and we don't just allow life to happen to you. but to put things in place so that you avoid what can be avoided. But otherwise, if you have no choice about it, then it's very important that we are able to accept what we have, accept in such a way that the mind is not made or rendered unhappy or unsettled. This is paramount, and this is very, very important. And so to bear in mind too the principles of karma, that we do not meet with a result if we haven't created the cause. And if we have created the cause, then it doesn't disappear of its own accord. And so this is something that we have responsibility for, the sufferings, these particular sufferings. And so that will help us to be able to accept that which we must accept anyway. And very, very important. But never to be in a situation where you are, as it were, overcome by the affliction of that suffering and lash out at others.
동해 당랭의 소와스도 동해 중앙이나 아니 배 동해의 캐네디스 디송요 말에 그 탑시 여바이나 동해의 셋업자 동해에서 먹어요 와 이네 다 탑시 가르다 이네 아니 거다 동해의 레스나 아니 때 마기바잖아 마대서 그 마기바잖아 마대바잖아 때 동해에다 다 랭이바 싸나 레미제바도 제바 추면서 와서 어느 거 당도랑 다 들레 동해 들레 때는 다 개와 두배 가리 고급도 어디 줍도 봐 제스 거다 갱에 람도 좋아지는 어다 들레 때는 어다 심제 생게 되는 지 랭이바 싸와 건가 내 들레 미마 쇼 녜티 고쳐봐 쇼 대다 담제 동해 많이 와쇼 어다 된데 삼로 땅에 아니 저기 랑게 잠바다 닌제다 장주가 셈디게 게게다 가서래 튕겨를 배주 땅도 봐 제스.
And so, of course, what is not being recommended here is that we are, just stuck and inactive and unable to do anything about the suffering that has befallen us. And that's not the case. We don't need suffering. It's not something that we go out and search for. But what we have to find is the means by which the suffering that we are experiencing is not making us unhappy. And that means that we are, if we can't avoid it in the first place, then when we have to experience it, then we do something about relieving it and overcoming it. And that's important. And so when we reflect on those two principles of karma, that we do not experience results if we haven't created a cause, and if we have created the cause, it doesn't disappear of its own accord. That is kind of helping us to put what's going on into context so that we can really ameliorate the suffering of it. But also it's kind of like looking for other means, whatever means we can, to relieve us of the particular suffering. And this is, about the mind training of taking misfortunes onto the path as much as anything else.
또 어디를 어느 심제 생게 동안 그가 당 레디나제 사자와 컨디션한테 동안 얘들 미봐쇼 얘들 고쳐봐쇼 anga 동에 들을 때는 나바데 아니 저가 소리 산제 공부 나바데 고쳐와 산제 공부도 저에 줄을 주어쇼 그 들을 때는 나 시바이네 시바데 산제 공부도 줄을 주어쇼 선서 어디는 뭐지.
And so we can really ramp up the power of what's going on to pray that on the basis of this suffering that I'm enduring now, may it be the cause, so that all sentient beings who are undergoing similar suffering, may it ripen upon me right now, and I'll take it on. And that if it's a sickness that I have to endure, may it be I'll turn it into a cause for enlightenment. Even if I were to die because of this, I will dedicate it that so that it is a cause for enlightenment as well. So have that sense of courage as well.
산제 타바다 탐제 캠에 고마 두베게 람라 캐시바이나 어다디 다 계속 좁아 차대요 봐.
So this is there definitely the process of taking misfortunes onto the path like that is very much in line with the activities of a bodhisattva.
어때? 다가는 이제 야 소소를 디기 중앙이네. 다가는 이제 디기 중앙 디기들 내 상부 사발 중앙에 아니 디기 디네시 심지어 탐자라 디네시 디기 용하쇼. 삼자 뭐하지? 뭐하지? 아니 디야 단다 코에 디기데 다디 탐제 캠베게 심지어 탐제 저기 산제 고바 되베 디기게 아니 튕기다 줄을 주어쇼 뭐하지?
And of course, the same applies to happiness. When we experience happiness, again, we reflect on this beautiful feeling that we're having, and on the basis of that, we dedicate it powerfully so that may all sentient beings be able to experience the happiness and bliss that I am experiencing now. May I understand this as, this happiness of cyclic existence. And may I dedicate it so that it's transformed into the bliss that is experienced as an omniscient mind, in the state of enlightenment itself. And be as conscientious about dedicating the happiness in that way as we are about the suffering.
네. 안디네 저 가정제 쉬지 뭐 왔다 디네 진짜 다가 이제 동해다 강해다 근데 지금 샘도스 마디 시시 연구도나 다디 용한테 그 유대의 주바 말에 스틱 규게 뭐 사는 유대의 주바이나 거뒤의 연구가 되면도 왔다고 규게 지라 때의 연구도 그 거뒤의 메토코 갈다 된 것을 라완도 마주바 다된 거예요. 대사디 규게 딱 그래 정말 와서 좀 제가 삼로단 님에게 겨왕님에게 거서데 레 아니 다른 게 아니 거서데 와서 다 지금 겐 아니 망부 지라 때는 용되겠지 망부 저 초알 때는 아니 거 줍되겠지 사도 거 라완의 주면도 와 삼사자 다 라완의 마주바 임바이 라완의 마주바 임바이자 거 매워서에도 와 삼사자 어떤데 다 라완의 마주바 다가다 야 동니 고 삼로다네 또 삼로다는 아니 라완의 마주바 다가랑 갈라 삼로다네 가자 가삼대선 디 대화대 동바 대도니 숨이 시께서 삼사 어떤데 공부하신 그죠 코제 마기바 차야다 컨트롤사야 되네 줄마다하자 디 동니 길라 녀바 장예 다 아니 저 그래서 저 동니를 녀바 장예다 동니 또에게는 지금 가서래 아니 통계를 자투바지에 와든지 아니 되게 중요하다 되게 그게 뭐지라 때도 라완을 좋아하면 라완 좋아하는 거뒤에 요구 문도와 단다 되게 연구도 그래서 거뒤에 연구문도 하디 가르놓고 그게 뭐지라 안 되도 써 아니고 레상부 사와다 아니 게 뭐지라 때는 연구도 와서 그래서 라완을 좋아하면도 와서 뒤 삼로단 아니 근데 라완도 마주바티 가자 가서들 강투도 셈샤 안디 대화대 니벨로데 동바데 대도니 스미 시켜서서 어디 저거 가서 뭐유게 내주 또에게 아니 튕겨라 바자도나 대화 중에 되기 전에 어떤데 질 자도바이나 아니 가서래 등 가서 지게 결하면서 미닝풀 승의 연구를 받아
So when we encounter suffering or problems in life, that and indeed, if we start to kind of become a little bit down or unhappy due to them, we should also reflect on the fact that this suffering and this problem is not an independent entity. It's not a self-powered entity, and that this kind of really starts to bring some distance between ourselves and the problem or the suffering, and to say that this is a karma that has been created, and now it's kind of met with a whole variety, a whole collection of conditions, that in combination with the cause are causing this to manifest as an entity now. But and bring emptiness into it as much as possible. When we look into it, we are looking into the lack of any objective or independent existence of this suffering, this problem here now, and get to the point of the mere negation of the object of negation, and from that, the bliss combining with voidness, and try to remain in the wisdom of non-dual bliss and voidness. This can be a very, very powerful antidote to an unhappy mind in a situation like that. And we employ exactly the same reasoning when happiness arises, when we meet with good fortune, or we have an instance of happiness, and we say, this is something also that cannot have any independent existence. If it did, it would be happiness all the time, but it's clearly not that case. It is not a self-powered entity. It is again arising from a positive karma, combining with a whole variety of conducive conditions, cooperating conditions, and that are then leading to this happening now. And again, you look into it like that. You apply the emptiness meditation, reaching that point of the mere negation of the object of negation, from that the bliss, combining with avoidance and the wisdom of non-dual bliss and avoidance. It's kind of very important that we can get down to the actuality of the situation in both instances here. And this really is able to, extract the full, most meaning out of each of those situations to make them very, very meaningful.
Yeah, what is it?
So let's leave it at that for today.
Yeah, that dinner set up a lama to on body or set up your job. And then I need to go so that comes on to our to cover, give a inaya, that dunga, and you dunga, cover to jig dunga, let me give a chat out. That the name by that the cover to jig dunga, Pamato, Badata, dunga, touch what you go, that the name was and that comes on quarter to cover that dunga, me give a shot. And did it that Tunga Chile Mitabaja Shasa and then Yavachu and John Samlotane, Rangi Chiwa Pamatachi Samlotan. And then Chinanga Chok and Deji Imba Ineta, to Kwa Ineta, Tabata Tamjiwatanya, Dega Chui Ineta, Kawateva Chinang, and Kwata Yang de Kawasamlotan in there, because you didn't to watch it, that do something to Karisna. Then Junga Redua, then a Junga Zedoko, you didn't do what the member that then go to send you didn't what do some Kacha Kasam de la Semithing Tosha. Then they gave a Lottie and because a Chua Pema Tabjega Tendo and you make him when Yakon was summertime. Then they invite Zata, some Tamjega to the Sanja Komatuna water, Chick took to a chita, you may to go. Rawan to one of Tapshi Mever, Rawan Moto was a what then a Junga what Tapshi to some Samatane, water, the Tower D Toneta, water, then they cook up to some Samatane, and some Jetamjega to the Sanja Komato, Toba Chi, some Sage logic. And then they go to Bade, David when Yakon shows up and it's a Lamar, Dagachi, Kuso to Yumuza, so, still as soon as a Tambika, Pet, Nibago, Sumatan, Sanja Komato, with the Jazz sons of what they combat Sheshua.
And so then we leave it there for today, and then we look into the dissolution process and beginning the process by reflecting on the fact of all of the 6 realms of cyclic existence and the various sufferings within, and how it's not just a suffering or the suffering of change, but indeed pervasive suffering, knowing that unless we get beyond pervasive suffering, we do not get beyond the suffering of cyclic existence itself, because it's in the nature of suffering. And so here we developed the notion of renunciation, which is symbolized by the lotus and mandala seat at our own crown, and then reflecting on the fact of all inner and outer phenomena lacking any independent existence, that even from all phenomena, whether within cyclic existence or beyond in nirvana, are lacking any objective or independent existence. We follow that through to the point of gaining an insight into the mere negation of the object of negation. And from that then symbolized, that emptiness is symbolized by the sun disk mandala seat. And understanding then that because phenomena lack any independent existence, they must therefore arise dependently depending on cause and condition. This makes everything possible. And in particular, it makes the attainment of enlightenment possible. And that this is where we dedicate ourselves to attain that state of enlightenment for the benefit of all living beings. And this is the mind of enlightenment, which is symbolized by the moon disk mandala seat. And so, having prepared that seat on our crown, we utter the invocation verse thrice. O glorious and precious root Guru, come take your lotus and moon feet placed here at my crown. Keep me safe in your kindness. Bestow on me the attainments of body, speech, and mind. And then at the end of the first recitation, the figure moves from the space in front. At the end of the second, they have arrived at our pre-prepared seat. And at the end of the third recitation, we have the certainty that they will remain with us until we attain the state of enlightenment.
What did it? And then that you got the Yala to my mandate to a pude. Rather, Chaza was such a position to Idan go to the Mandela, Nian times, Yala to a mandate to a pude. Then Yanjo, Nyanjung. Comes to call to Kawaki, Tungal Middle, Yanjung Compassion, and then Yanjung gave a lot, and a rang the Pamata Jessel Jusu, some such. Then Chinaga chocolate, you then to what do some never in Bayinza, telling Kota Choba Samatan, Kachaka something, then they gave a lot, and you make him when Yakan joined and the Pamatama Kivakan, then Neso, something. Then Simja Tamjak, Sanja Kuma, you want you to Matan, Tam to Toba Chigi, son of Compassion. And then they gave it to Bati, and Davin was Yakan, Pandesa, Lama, Taganinga, Kusu to Yungu, Sunday, and Rangichi journey. And we are second number is my journey, Tambicos, Nibicos, Subtension, Sanja Kubamato, the Chesu, Kalkom. Then Pamata get the Kamatsum, and Namjuning Neta take a logic of a song of a Kachen, Tia Tawato, and the Metsanga diet of Omonumans, diet of Omonus, Rimbasum Court. Then Jesu Jamaya Sunga, Arapasan Lati, Omarapasan, the Omarapasan, the Rimbasum. Then they go Sunga, Omayeta, my head on my Shamana, you saw the Rimbasum Court. What did the Jacobashe?
So then we at this point offer the 7 limbs of practice and the mandala, and rejoice in the fact that the Buddha remaining with us until we attain the state of enlightenment. And then also we start to make an appropriate seat at our heart center by reflecting again on the fact that wherever we are born in cyclic existence, we do not get beyond suffering. And this is producing the lotus mandala seat. And also the fact of all inner and outer phenomena lacking any objective existence, and even at the atomical level, producing the sun mandala disk. And the fact of how I must quickly rededicate myself to attain the state of enlightenment in order to benefit all sentient beings, producing the moon mandala seat of the mind of enlightenment itself. And then again, uttering the invocation verse, thrice, O glorious and precious root Guru, come take your lotus and moon seat placed here at my heart. Keep me safe in your kindness, bestow on me the attainments of body, speech, and mind. At the first recitation, the figure of the Guru Buddha moved down from our crown chakra down through the central channel. At the end of the second, they have arrived at our pre-prepared seat. And again, at the end of the third recitation, we have the certainty that they will remain until we attain the state of enlightenment. We rejoice at this as the petals of the lotus fold over and are sealed at their tips by a white 5-pronged vajra. And then that package is surrounded by three mantras: the name mantra of Shakyamuni Buddha in a clockwise direction, the mantra of Manjushri in an anti-clockwise direction, and the mantra of dependent origination in a clockwise direction.
Rangi Nigu Uso, Lama Shaja Samba Sangiti Shube, and Kusun Tula, Wesa Patome, Ranga Chibone, Kandiga Pala, and Lutanjal Wesegi Tamne, and Tomame, the Badri Kawatuya, Dakanjaja, Mikejubu, Sudum, 당 딱겨라 소베 냐바 근데 사이는 다간시 제베 하나마도 라제 하나마도 냐바 근데 사이는 세티 생가마 디인가마 토마메 득받지만 겨바도 소소답에 동바다가 전주스면 라바다고 상하게 다제다 파다 말마고 힘을 로버나 조성버서 뭐 군조선 또나 토레 토베 계속 코아데 예송은 예동 근데 치사와 이번에 상신 다바 차소 전체자 다간이 생각 다 최주변 개개 최슈대 루그 나자 생고 동안에서 어때서 인도 루그 나자 생고 동안 컨디션이 있는 대다 탐제 시와 중수 섬사 다간이 생 아니 지금 뉴도 산제 고마토발라 자롱 틸레 레스롱아 비다고 고우여래 자롱 틸레 교연 탐제 장 가난 탐제 다바람 잡아지 차도가 야고 시우 중수 선서 고마셔.
And then from within the lotus leaves, then light rays begin to emanate from the Buddha within, permeating through every cell of our bodies, from the soles of our feet to the crown of our heads, affecting a purification of all negativities and obscurations that we've accumulated since beginningless time, including the infractions of our ethical conduct, of refraining from the 10 non-virtues, of all negativities that we have accumulated, whether they have been proscribed by the Buddha or naturally occurring negativities, the negativities of this life, the previous life, of the life related to the one before that, going right back to beginningless time, all of these are become completely eradicated and purified. All negativities, infractions, and downfalls related to Pratimoksha vows, Bodhisattva vows, and Tantric vows, all acts of disrespect towards our parents, up to our gurus, and all of the negativities associated with the body and mind, which prevent us from very effectively engaging in spiritual practice, be it sickness and illness, or mental illness, and so on. The rectification of the imbalances of elements of our channels, winds, and drops to help us in our practice. And in particular, the main issue for us being able to quickly attain a state of enlightenment, being ordinary appearance, that is counteracted by our gaining pure perception.
어디서 안다들이 메자다 어디를 공부시 안데네 아들한게 신도 타외 롱디 닐랭게자 라마샤자스가 고데 현지 지금 전에 소소류들 라마샤자스가 고려 교수 삼사자 소소 셈데 신도 타외 셈데 닐랭자 라마샤자스가 투들 현지 지금 소소 셈데 라마샤자스가 투로 교수 삼사 랑게 류가 예선다 라마샤자스가 구중 뭐 예매 교수 삼사자 문에 고려 교수 삼사자 다 줘봐 삼로다 도서 삼사체 아니 디 대화데 대외도 대도니 숨이 시켜서 삼사체 아니 란내사게 내디야 내의견 탐제 된 라마샤자스게 다베시도 교수 삼사체 라 라마샤자스게 구수도 뭐 이메 교와데 나라라시메 바삼로다 안디 투갈레 라마샤자스게 빠도 매바트네 아니 라제스 어다 타이베 마게 셈제 탐제라베 라마샤자스게 차상와레레 팀소성 디티발레 때네 타이베 마게 셈제 다다 탐제자 키지게 라마샤자스게 구조도 뭐 예매 교수 섬사죠 대다게 내사게 내다 감수 도와리 두고 내 탐제 여기 견 탐제 다는 라마샤자스게 다베신도 교수 섬사죠 오다 셈제 탐제게 된도 산제 고만주 셈제 된도 산제 고마 거기서 다 님어 데린 거소 그것도 손을 가고
And so then through the combination of my own most subtle wind acting as the substantial cause, together with the body of the Buddha acting as the cooperative conditions, my own body is transformed into the enlightened body of the Buddha. And then through the combination of my own most subtle mind acting as the substantial cause, together with the mind of the Buddha acting as the cooperative conditions, my own mind is transformed into the enlightened mind of the Buddha. Thereafter, I feel my body, speech, and mind now is completely inseparable from the body, speech, and mind of an enlightened being. I can rejoice in this fact. This joy brings forth a sense of bliss, which combines with voidness, and I abide in the wisdom of non-dual bliss and voidness. And thereafter, then seeing myself as a fully enlightened being, and also realizing that this is completely lacking any inherent existence, I send forth light rays, limitless light rays, out into all the realms of existence, upon absorbing into all the sentient beings in existence, they are completely transformed into enlightened beings themselves, and their place also is transformed of all fault and becomes the enlightened realm of an enlightened abode of a Buddha. And that this is something that I can really rejoice in. Today is the day that I have been able to make this happen, to lead all sentient beings to enlightenment. How wonderful.
That's some jet. I'm just Sanjay Salakoba. They should run Sanjay Sal, some jet Sanjay Salakoba. And what the Kaja Salakoba, they should run Kiwaka. This took a sort of you did the matter of Toka Pata. They were but they don't use me. She gets so commercial.
And this leading of all sentient beings to the state of enlightenment, the virtue that has facilitated that, and myself as the agent of that virtue, completely lacking in any objective existence, and merely imputed by thought. And from that, I developed a sense of bliss, combining with voidness, and again abide in the wisdom of non-dual bliss and voidness.
What that was maybe easy once when that attended some lieutenant Lamja Sanja chooses the Kawaii. Your married Yina Yang and Tarenti, some Lutan and Shinchan, Rimbu Matoba, Yurbu Magoba, Rimbu Matoba, and attended to what you young shores, the some Lutan. What are the leg to Allah, Ransanja Combatobutua? This over Titovala, Chanjuk said Tony to be Sherak in Yamache Gutua, that Majava Tamadua, that the day in Bayinza, that Rangi. That netan kari chamba ina dewa chunga na neta dugi dunga chunga ina da netan gande chunga nyena jona sana dena netan gande chamba na ani geba ina tama chiwa inba ina ya deda tamje janjuga sem ge da dongni dobe sherab ge 튕겨를 주와 쇼스 튕겨를 주와 쇼스 wada ngwa jetre.
And so, of course, we're operating at the level of imagination here, the level of aspirational belief. So, and yet, I want to guarantee, I want to rededicate so that whatever virtue that has been accumulated here may lead to being able to make this manifest for real in the future, and also that it will not take long, and that it will happen as quickly as possible. And also that I know I have no choice but to attain this state of enlightenment to benefit sentient beings. Therefore, I will use every possible situation to perfect the mind of enlightenment, to realize emptiness directly. And so whatever the situation I am in, whether I'm sitting or going or eating or drinking, whether I'm sick, even at death, may all of those situations become conducive conditions for me to be able to generate the mind of enlightenment and the wisdom realizing emptiness.
What did it? Yeah. Gyawande da la san ge do che ya ma le ba de ye sa la go para so chan jo sen jo re bo che ma ge pa ma ge jo che ge ba ya ma me ba ya go ne go do pe wa sho do ne da wa re mo che ma ge pa na ma ge yo ge ba na ba me ba go ne go do Help show Korea Rawe Korea Shingamande 偏大的我马路中外面。接着是我点赞家作业，下边是研究论结为没为没为结为罗山这边下来所问的妙妙这边见见人是妙见妙我不沾别样，该见见别，诸天所爱不，罗山这边下来所问的。妙妙这是妙见别，我不沾别样，爱见别。不见总高不罗山这边下来所问的。
You are Avalokiteshvara, great treasure of compassion, not aimed at true existence. And Manjushri, master of flawless wisdom, as well as Vajrapani, destroyer of foes and demons, without exception. Sankapa, crown jewel of the sages of the land of snows, rose from Jakpa at your feet.
That's what.